don't get me wrong, as should be incredibly obvious from a lot of the things I've said, I like Wayland. What should also be obvious, though, is that Wayland still has a lot of legitimate problems that still need to be addressed. But one thing that is often stated matter-of-factly is that gaming on Wayland is simply worse because Wayland has a much higher latency. And for games where latency is incredibly important, games where having high-speed movement and high-speed reaction is the game, things like CSGO, Marvel Rivals, Osu, and of course the very important Garfield Kart, ensuring your latency is as low as possible is incredibly important. Now, there's also a bunch of this general advice on how to lower your latency. Things like disabling compositing, using a latency-optimized DXVK fork, using a gaming-specific kernel scheduler. All of these things apparently make things better. Now, I don't personally play any games at this point where latency is incredibly important to the gaming experience. Well, I guess to some extent there is Path of Exile, but the goal in that game is to become so powerful that either nothing can kill you or everything dies before it can try to kill you. So, not really the same thing. But how much of this is actually true? How much of this actually makes gaming better? Is Wayland actually worse than X11 for gaming? Or is this just a placebo from people that don't like Wayland? Well, the only way to find out is to actually run the numbers, and someone did exactly that, measuring input latency on Linux, X11 versus Wayland, VRR, and DXVK. Now, to be clear, it is not testing every single possible thing. This testing is being done on KDE, on a modern version of KDE, so if you're on a different environment like a GNOME or something that is only on Wayland like a Hyperland or a Cosmic, the results very well may differ, and those are also worth testing as well. But with KDE being the desktop that is supported by Valve, that is shipped on the Steam machine, the Steam Deck, with that being the case, and a lot of people who are coming from the Windows side switching over to KDE on Linux, it logically makes the most sense to talk about this one. Also, I like KDE, so what better reason could there be? Now, for the testing, a few scenarios were considered. Firstly, display server. X11 versus native Wayland. So not running the game through XWayland, running it natively on Wayland. I believe in the last maybe year and a half, 2 years, this is something you can enable inside of Proton. I'll show you how to do so a little bit later. VRR, on versus off. So this is your G-Sync, your FreeSync, whatever tech it happens to be, having this variable refresh rate. Does it make it better? Does it make it worse? DXVK low latency fork on versus off. DXVK is DirectX to Vulkan, so Wine converts the Windows calls into Linux calls. DXVK converts the DirectX calls into Vulkan calls, so our GPU can do the GPU things the GPU needs to do. Now, this is basically just mainline DXVK with some additional patches to improve frame pacing to supposedly lower your latency, and if it actually does work, I would expect this to eventually be merged into mainline DXVK. Currently, it has been merged into Proton CachyOS, and like many things in the CachyOS ecosystem, like their kernel and all of this other stuff, a lot of people are recommending it. DXVK low latency versus default DXVK uncapped, so letting DXVK just run as fast as it wants, just produce as many frames as is possible. And lastly, native Wayland versus XWayland. Is XWayland bad? Is XWayland slow? Does XWayland cause all of our problems? The system being tested on is by all accounts a pretty standard system. It's got a 5800X3D, which is a okay CPU. It's a couple of generations old, but totally fine gaming CPU. A 4070 Super, which is, again, a generation old, and being NVIDIA, my understanding is NVIDIA is worse. So if the results for Wayland are good, presumably on AMD they would be just as good or even better. And I don't know, maybe NVIDIA's got their act together and things actually work well now, but considering how NVIDIA has been over time, that's just my assumption. This is probably also worth testing. Probably the only weird thing here is the 500 hertz monitor, which a lot of people don't have, but if you're going to do a test like this, you might as well have as many frames visible as possible. Personally, I run I think this display is 180 hertz, I believe. Most people don't really have above 240 is kind of like the max limit for most normal people. There are 360 hertz monitors out there. They are far less common. If we've got a 500 hertz monitor, usually that's because you either have a lot of money or you're really, really into CSGO. Or you have less money, but you like to spend it. Also, the testing was done on CashOS with, at the time, the latest package versions available, which is pretty much the latest version of this software in the first place. Also, being on CashOS, it is going to use the CashOS kernel scheduler. I would have liked to see this also be tested. Run it with the regular Arch Linux kernel, see if the changes from CashOS actually make any sort of difference. Testing here was done with a game known as Diabotical. The game doesn't really matter as long as it is running consistently and you're always testing it in the exact same way. This is also being run at the minimum settings at the native screen resolution with 100% render scale. So no doing like FSR or anything like that, just running the game basically as lightly as possible. All we care about is latency. We don't really care about any like sort of frame rate fluctuations. As for the testing hardware, it is basically just a light sensor and it is attached to the screen, and then when light changes, well, it detects the light and then you have your latency, and then you do the testing a bunch of times and then, you work out how fast latency is. Pretty simple. Tech's a bit complicated, but simple to execute. As for the testing methodology, anything that wasn't needed was going to be closed. So you have the game, you have the desktop, you have the game launcher, because modern video games, get rid of everything else. Within the game itself, start a local match, same map, same spot, same mouse positioning, no bots or other players to go around and ruin the testing, no round ends, the rounds are infinitely long, and the device does not move between each of the tests. Then run the test for about 2 minutes per setting, and then go to the next test. Now, with all of that preamble out of the way, it is time for the results. If you game on Wayland, they're probably not going to be that surprising. If you don't, though, maybe you're going to learn something. Here we have the graph. This is the median, so this is the middle value. We also have the 5th percentile and the 95th percentile, but we'll talk about those in just a moment. Absolutely unsurprisingly, with the exception of spot number 2, all the top spots are X11. X11, variable refresh rate, DXVK low latency, and then Wayland running the exact same settings. Then we have X11 low latency uncapped, X11 variable refresh rate, X11 low latency, Wayland variable refresh rate, then is just regular old X11, Wayland low latency, and all the way down here is regular old Wayland. Obviously then, with regular Wayland being so far down the list, it's just impossible to game on Wayland. Well, no. Take note of the number here. Yes, it is really far down the list. This is milliseconds. There is a 0.72 millisecond gap between the fastest option, X11 variable refresh rate, DXVK low latency, and regular old Wayland without any of the optimizations. So we're on the same page about what 0.7 milliseconds actually is. If we have a screen that is running at 60 FPS, 60 Hertz, a frame is on screen for 16.67 milliseconds. We're dealing with 0.72 milliseconds. If we go up to 240 Hertz, which realistically is what most people at the limit have today, maybe 360, but far less likely, at that point, it is still 4.17 milliseconds. That's not to say that having better latency is a bad thing, but the amount of latency is so small that I don't think realistically anyone could actually tell the difference. Maybe there is someone out there, but I'm not that someone. I'm definitely not that someone. Maybe you're that someone. I don't know. Very possible. But the graph does get worse. Funnily, if we go XWayland uncapped, it actually runs worse. Then we have XWayland low latency, and all the way down the bottom, XWayland. And this is not a 0.72 millisecond gap. Between XWayland and even just regular old Wayland, it is 3 milliseconds. Then if we go up to the fastest option here, it is almost 4 milliseconds. Now, that's still a very, very low amount. But that is starting to get to the point where if you're someone who plays a lot of video games, if you're someone who plays a lot of things where reaction time is important and rhythm and all of this sort of stuff, now we are getting to the point where that could very well maybe not be hyper noticeable, but start to feel a little off, where you don't really have the ability to pin it down, but something is wrong. Here is my theory. The problem was never Wayland. XWayland was the cause the entire time. And up until about a year and a half, 2 years ago, if you're playing a game on Steam, if you're playing a game through Heroic, if you're playing a Windows game on Linux, Wine didn't have a Wayland driver yet, so Proton didn't have a Wayland driver. Anytime you ran those games on Wayland, they were running in XWayland. Every single time. Even if you ran the game in GameScope, it was running in XWayland on GameScope. All of our problems, all of these discussions about Wayland gaming being worse are entirely the fault of trying to run X11 on top of Wayland. X11 by itself is fine. It's actually the best option here if you're willing to do the VRR and low latency stuff. X11 by itself is still just better than regular Wayland. But running it on top of Wayland was not suitable for gaming. If we consider the 5th percentile and the 95th percentile, that is 5% of the data falls below this point and 95% of the data falls below this point. You can already see the number down the bottom there. XWayland gets to 9.8 milliseconds. Remember, a frame at 60 hertz is 16.67 milliseconds. If you're at 120 hertz, you're gonna notice XWayland. Another interesting point is both under 5th and 95th percentile, the ordering actually changes a little bit. Some of the options that are way further down on the list would actually move up considerably higher. Now, the option that is the best possible option is still the best possible option, but that should surprise absolutely no one. X11 wins in each scenario, but it is just a 0.14 to 0.22 millisecond difference. And the latency distribution tells pretty much the exact same story. Variable refresh rate on versus off. Variable refresh rate has the biggest impact across the pairings. Enabling is 0.26 to 0.45 milliseconds faster than leaving it disabled. It also flattens the distribution. The P95 to P5 spread is 2.1 to 2.2 in the variable refresh rate cases versus 2.6 to 3.0 without variable refresh rate. DXVK low latency is good. It's probably at some point, assuming it doesn't cause any additional sort of problems, just going to become part of mainline DXVK and hopefully at some point just gets enabled by default. If it is just all around better, there's no reason not to. In the capped test cases, the difference is small, but consistent and of about the same magnitude as X11 versus Wayland, where the difference between X11 and Wayland is on average 0.18 milliseconds. Using DXVK low latency is on average 0.2 milliseconds faster. In the uncapped test cases, we can get an idea of where the real strength of DXVK low latency lies, smoothing out uneven frame pacing and preventing render queue buildup. The pacer does this by making sure the GPU is never fully utilized, so the game is always close to GPU bound, but never entirely. This could be observed in the test runs where GPU utilization was at 95 to 97%, where GPU utilization was at 95 to 97% with DXVK low latency, and at 100% without it. This comes at a small price in the form of FPS. So if you're willing to take, maybe a 5%, probably not even that. And in this test, we are going from 715 to 670 FPS, which is a 45 FPS loss. But also, at that level of FPS, it literally doesn't matter. If you're above the refresh rate of your display, it's fine. If you're getting better latency, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. But if you're going from barely playable to not really playable, then it might be a different equation to ask, and maybe for those games, you don't want to make use of this. And surprising absolutely no one ever, XWayland is bad. Wow. Who would have thought? Now, it's totally fine for day-to-day usage, browsing the web, checking your emails, watching video, just general, using a terminal, general work things. But it is not suitable for latency-demanding tasks. If you want to enable the Wayland driver in Proton, all you need to do is have a relatively modern version and add proton_enable_Wayland=1, and then this at the end to make sure the game's actually going to open, and then you're good to go. This is going to do it on a game-by-game basis. If you want to add it to your general global environment variables, that can also be done. Do note that some games may not behave properly with it. And as for the DXVK low latency fork, the easiest way to get it is with Proton CacheOS. You can go and download it from the GitHub if you want to. I use a tool called Proton Upqt. It is a very convenient tool. So let's go and add a version and then swap over to Proton CacheOS and let's just grab the latest version here, install that, give it a moment. Now all we need to do is just restart Steam and we should have it. As always, go to the compatibility section, force a version of Proton, and then select the new one you've just installed. Lastly, add one more thing into your launch options, this one right here, Proton_DXVK_low latency=1, and we should be good to go. Welcome to video game. It feels roughly the same because you're not going to notice a change like this in a game like this, but the game is, at the very least, functioning, which is, good. At the very least, the game's working, because that can sometimes break. Just keep that in mind. These results were produced under best case conditions, stable FPS at cap, CPU bound, and are of course specific to my hardware and chosen software stack. The absolute numbers will look different on other setups, but the gains and losses from each test should roughly transfer. On a low refresh rate display, the gains from variable refresh rate and low latency pacer would likely be even larger. TLDR, you can absolutely game on Wayland, but maybe it's about time to stop using XWayland for everything and just switch over. I've done so now. All of my game is going to be like this. I didn't realize how much of a difference it was. This is not the first time that work of this nature has been done. David Romero built his M2P latency and compared X11 versus Wayland in his article, Building an Input Latency Meter Because Wayland Feels Off Isn't a Metric. And he came to pretty much the exact same conclusions that XWayland sucks. Now in his testing, it was even worse. But Wayland, X11, and Windows are all roughly the same. It's just XWayland that's the problem. Farnoy also did the exact same thing with open source LDAT, and would you be surprised to know he found the exact same thing. XWayland is terrible for gaming. So what have we learned today? Wayland, slightly worse, but still totally fine, and the difference is basically imperceptible, especially if you're using variable refresh rate and you're using DXVK low latency. XWayland, though, terrible. Stop using it. So, did you know? And do you game on Wayland? Do you game on X11? Were you gaming with XWayland? And if you were, are you going to fix your life? Let me know. So, if you liked the video, go like the video, go subscribe as well, and also click that hype button if you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here. Check out the Patreon, subscribe, Silly Bear Pay, linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and I knew it was bad. I didn't realize it was that bad.
Something like this.